We've decided to move in a new direction.
The laser pointer was still on the blueprint when his voice cut through the room. We've decided to move in a new direction. The words hung in the air like dust in sunlight. The skyline shimmered on the glass wall cranes. Light. And 29 years of my life suspended in reflection. 12:22 p.m. My presentation froze mid-slide. The CEO leaned back, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm that sounded like a countdown. "Effective immediately," he said. "My nephew Ethan will assume your position." For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. I'd built this company's foundations, its bridges, its skylines, its reputation. After 3 decades of shaping its bones, I'd become part of its concrete. And now, with a single sentence, I was scraped off like dust. If you've ever built something piece by piece and watched it slip away in silence, tell me, where are you listening from right now? And if this story feels familiar, stay with me, subscribe, and let's see how it all unfolds. The room stayed painfully quiet. Someone shifted their chair, another cleared their throat, pretending to read the agenda. Ethan's tablet glowed against his cuff. He looked up with a smile polished by privilege. He had the kind of confidence only inheritance can buy. I reached for my badge. The metal trembled against my fingertips before I steadied it. I placed it in front of the CEO, then let the blueprint speak for me. I said. No one answered. The projector light washed everything pale. I turned toward the glass doors, the reflection of an older man following me across the floor, one who'd learned the weight of silence. Behind me, a faint voice from the control desk broke the air. "Sir, the model won't open." Clicks. Then panic. "It's asking for a Mercer ID." I didn't look back. The hallway smelled of dust and cold metal, the scent of something ending, and something else beginning. I stood by the glass wall, staring down at the construction site that once pulsed with my every heartbeat. The cranes swung lazily in the noon heat. Below, the clang of metal and drills rose through the air like an echo of a life that no longer belonged to me. The coffee on my desk had gone cold hours ago. When the next burst of drilling hit the concrete, the cup trembled just enough to ripple the surface, just enough to remind me that I was still standing here. I turned back to the desk I'd worked at for nearly 3 decades. The drawers were filled with blueprints layered like memories creased, annotated, lived in. I started gathering them slowly, one roll at a time, as if packing away pieces of myself. The silence in the office was heavier than it had been during the meeting. Outside my door, people whispered, but no one came in. Grief in workplaces is always awkward. Everyone knows, but no one speaks. My eyes fell on the model bridge resting near the window, the one that had won the National Design Award 12 years ago. Dust had settled thickly over its arch, dulling the steel finish. I brushed it off with my fingertips until my name reappeared on the baseplate G. Mercer. For a moment I felt a sting behind my eyes, not pride, just fatigue. The bridge had been built to last a century, but its designer had apparently expired at 29 years of service. I sank into the chair, feeling the rhythm of the machines from the lower floors vibrating through the soles of my shoes. Somewhere in that rhythm was the sound of my career being dismantled, beam by beam. Still, beneath the ache, there was calm, a hollow kind, but steady. I told myself that structure always finds a way to hold, even when everything around it shifts. When I finally reached for the stack of old project folders, the top file slipped open. A faded contract, dated 1999, slid across the desk. I caught it before it fell, my thumb pressing over a faint line near the bottom margin. The text was nearly erased by time, but still visible under the right angle of light. Clause 917, personnel safety approval required. The letters blurred for a moment before coming into focus again. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared, letting the quiet stretch around me until it felt like the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. I spent the afternoon surrounded by silence and paper. The office light had dimmed to that late-hour haze where everything looked older than it was. Dust floated like static between the shelves. The 1999 contract still lay open on my desk, the faded letters catching the glow from the lamp. I leaned closer, tracing the line again. Slower this time, Clause 917, personnel safety approval required. At first, it didn't mean much. I'd written hundreds of clauses, thousands of signatures, through the years. But then I read it again, and something clicked. The words carried weight I hadn't noticed before, something deliberate. Protective. Clause 917 wasn't a technicality, it was a lock. The text was clear. Any change of the lead structural engineer without federal approval automatically voids all active safety and insurance certifications. I sat back, pulse steady but rising underneath. For years, I had fought to include that clause, insisting that safety oversight couldn't be politicized. Management had called it redundant at the time. They'd signed it anyway because it looked responsible on paper. Now, after 29 years, that forgotten line sat quietly waiting, buried in legal ink, but very much alive. I opened the company's internal system, fingers hesitating over the keyboard. The login still recognized my credentials. They hadn't revoked access yet. The dashboard blinked to life. My name was still listed as lead engineer of record across 6 ongoing projects. Beneath it, a field marked Federal Review Pending. My throat tightened. I navigated to the notification log. There it was, the administrative section where all personnel changes were reported to the Federal Safety Bureau. The last entry was dated 5 years ago. No new submission, no approval. The realization struck like a slow-moving tremor. The company had fired me without even filing the mandatory request, which meant, as of now, the entire corporate insurance framework was hanging by a thread. I took a deep breath, forcing my thoughts into order. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, not yet. It was awareness, cold, steady, and precise, the kind of clarity that comes when you stop bleeding long enough to see the wound. Then, without warning, my screen flickered. A small notification appeared at the top corner. System message, pending approval for lead change, Clause 917. I froze. The system had detected the unauthorized replacement automatically. The clause, written decades ago, was doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect the structure from corruption, even if the corruption wore a suit. The cursor blinked on the screen, patient and unhurried. I leaned back in the chair, letting the rhythm of my heartbeat slow again, for the first time in days. I didn't feel useless. I felt something else, like the faint hum of steel returning tension after a long winter. The clause was awake, and so was I. They called it a handover session. 2 days after my dismissal, the legal department requested that I return to finalize the transfer of documents for the ongoing projects. Technically, my license still tied the company to its safety certifications. They needed my signature before they could move on. I arrived early, before most employees showed up. The guard at the front desk glanced at me, hesitated, then nodded. No one wanted to say it aloud, but everyone knew I was back only because the system still needed me. I sat at the audit room they'd assigned, bare walls. No nameplate, just a temporary workstation and a company laptop. A thermos of black coffee steamed beside me as I pulled up the external archive. My fingers moved automatically across the keyboard, each click steady, methodical, one by one. I opened the project folders: Federal Infrastructure Program, Westline Bridge, Armitage Dam. Every license, every certificate carried the same line at the bottom: G. Mercer, Lead Engineer of Record. It felt strange reading my own name so many times, as though I were auditing the ghost of a man still living. Yet, that repetition steadied me. Precision had always been my language. The world could lie, but documents rarely did. By mid-morning, I had mapped out the full trail: each permit, its corresponding safety filing, every insurance note bound to my federal ID. I leaned back, letting the logic settle like gears locking into place. If I stayed calm, the pattern would reveal itself. I took out my phone and scrolled through contacts until I found the one person who could confirm what I already suspected. Alan Reed, Federal Safety Bureau. Old friend. We hadn't spoken in years when his rough voice answered. The sound grounded me. "Grant, it's been forever. I heard about what happened. I'm fine," I said. "I need a favor. Can you verify my active filings under the Mercer license?" He typed for a while. 6 active projects, all insured, all under your name. And if they replace me without submitting approval," Alan paused, "then everything linked to those filings is suspended automatically. Insurance, contracts, even funding until the Bureau reapproves the new lead. That's federal code. You helped write it." Remember, I felt my pulse steady. The confirmation wasn't triumph. It was structure, pressure redistributed, not released. "Appreciate it," I said quietly, before hanging up. Alan hesitated. "Grant, what are you going to do?" "Nothing outside the system," I replied. "It's already designed to respond." The call ended. I closed the folder, the monitor's reflection cutting a sharp line across my face. Outside. The morning sun hit the steel beams of the new tower, throwing white light through the window. A countdown had begun quiet, invisible, inevitable, and I didn't need to lift a finger. Night had settled across the city like a thin layer of ash. The office was empty except for the faint hum of the servers and the low vibration of the HVAC above me. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. The glow from the monitor was enough a cold, sterile blue that washed over the papers spread across my desk. I scrolled through the draft for the 10th time, reading every line with the detached precision I once used to inspect a bridge under strain. The report wasn't long, but every sentence had weight. Subject structural risk assessment, unauthorized leadership change. It sounded clinical, almost boring, but it was anything but. The attached documents told the real story system log showing that the CEO had removed me without notifying the Federal Safety Bureau, certifications still registered under my name, and a clause that no one had remembered existed until it woke up. Clause 917 was more than a rule. It was a failsafe written to protect the company from itself. The cursor blinked patiently at the bottom of the screen, waiting for a signature. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing the stiffness from my fingers. A younger version of me might have written this with anger. Tonight, there was only clarity. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was restoring balance. I attached the archived certificate files dated, verified, irrefutable, then the system logs, timestamps, and digital trail that led straight to the leadership change. I even included the communication freeze between the company and the Bureau. No commentary, just data. Data was the purest kind of truth. The city lights shimmered outside the glass, mirrored against the screen in front of me. For a moment, my reflection overlapped the email window, a silhouette framed by steel and blue light. The fatigue in my face didn't look like defeat anymore. It looked like focus. I reread the closing line, failure to comply with Clause 917 may result in the immediate suspension of all active insurance and construction permits. No emotion, no accusation, just fact. The mouse hovered over send. I drew a slow breath, steadying it at the edge of release. When I clicked, the sound was soft but sharp. A tiny mechanical break like a trigger pulled in a shooting range where the gun is quiet, but the target is real. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a faint tone chimed, and a notification appeared on the corner of the screen. System alert, automatic distribution in progress. Recipients, Federal Safety Bureau, Allied Bank Group, National Contractors Insurance. The report was gone. Replicated, transmitted, and time-stamped. There was no undo button for what came next. I sat back, exhaled through my teeth, and closed my eyes for a moment. The tension didn't vanish, it realigned. Outside, somewhere in the dark grid of the city, the first gears of consequence had begun to move. The message came early that morning. Short and unnervingly polite, federal inspection, immediate compliance required. By the time I reached the office gates, 3 black sedans were already parked in front of the main building. The Federal Safety Bureau didn't announce visits unless something had gone wrong, terribly wrong. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. People spoke in clipped whispers, papers shuffled faster than usual, and every monitor seemed to glow too bright. I caught the CEO's eyes through the glass of the upper conference room, for the first time since my dismissal. He looked uncertain. Fear always travels faster than memory. They called me in an hour later. Independent consultant, the summons said. Technically, it was true. I'd been reclassified under an external advisory contract the moment Clause 917 triggered the compliance freeze. The Bureau needed a signature from the original engineer of record, and that name hadn't changed yet. The inspection room was cold, deliberately neutral, just steel tables, a projector, and too much silence. Alan Reed was there, the same gravel voice I'd spoken to days earlier, now wearing the Bureau's crest on his lapel. He nodded to me once, a professional acknowledgement that said, "Play it straight." Ethan stood by the presentation screen, his expression tight. He was surrounded by managers, lawyers, and the CEO himself, who looked pale under the fluorescent lights. The projector flickered to life, showing the latest revision of the structural model. "This," Ethan began, voice strained but steady, "is our updated framework. All specifications are current. The leadership transition was completed." A flicker interrupted him. The screen flashed red for a second, then white text crawled across the diagram. Unauthorized lead signature. Validation failed. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye turned toward me. But I didn't move. I stood still, the blue light from the monitor slicing across my face like a blade. Alan adjusted his glasses, voice low but precise. "Mr. Mercer, is that your authorization line?" "Yes," I said quietly. "And as per clause 917, any attempt to modify the certification without approval from the Bureau automatically voids all active permissions." The projector blinked again. One by one, the live models on the connected screens froze. The loading bars turned gray, followed by a single system-wide alert. All project data locked pending federal clearance. No one breathed. The CFO's pen slipped from his hand and rolled across the table. Ethan's jaw clenched. The CEO leaned forward, his voice trembling. "What does that mean?" Alan answered for me. Calm as a metronome. "It means every project, every loan, every insurance policy tied to these records is suspended until we verify compliance." I said nothing. I didn't need to. The system had spoken louder than I ever could. It started with a phone call no one wanted to answer. The CFO picked up first, his face draining of color before the rest of us could hear the words. "All active accounts are frozen." The sentence hung in the air like a death certificate. Within minutes, chaos rippled through the building. Phones rang nonstop, executives shouted into receivers, and the trading floor went silent one screen at a time. The company's heartbeat, those endless rows of numbers and cash flows, flatlined. I stood near the glass wall, watching the skyline beyond the chaos. Cranes stalled mid-swing. The drilling at the central site stopped so abruptly it felt like the city itself had forgotten to breathe. Across the bridge project, the floodlights flickered, then blinked out. Entire blocks of construction went dark, leaving only the glow of the emergency lights. "Get the banks on the line," the CEO shouted, his voice cracking through the noise. "Tell them it's a technical error, temporary," but even from across the room, I could see the reflection on his tablet screen. The number wasn't temporary. It was final, 1.7 billion frozen under federal audit. Ethan stood beside him, pale, fumbling with a stack of statements. They're saying all funds linked to your authorization code are locked until further notice," he stammered. "My authorization." The CEO turned on him, rage spilling into the air. "You were supposed to fix this." "It's not me," Ethan whispered. "It's the system. It's clause 917. The name dropped like a hammer. The same clause they'd mocked in the boardroom now controlled their empire. Their arrogance had built the trap. I'd only left the door open. I stayed quiet as executives scrambled, tripping over cables and shouting down deadlines. The CFO tried calling the insurers next, then the banks, then the investors. Every call ended the same silence. Then a mechanical response account temporarily suspended pending investigation on the 18th floor. The sound of drills and generators finally ceased. The silence was eerie. It wasn't peace, it was absence. A vacuum where noise had been. An assistant burst through the door holding a tablet. "Sir, it's on the news." The CEO snatched it from her hand, his eyes darting across the screen. The color drained from his face, leaving him gray under the fluorescent lights. Breaking news. Mercer clause. Crisis, the largest freeze in construction history. For a moment, no one moved. The air seemed to fold in on itself. Then the CEO let out a strangled sound, a mix of rage and disbelief before collapsing into his chair. Ethan stood motionless beside him, staring at the words that would follow him for the rest of his career. I didn't smile. I just turned away from the window and walked toward the elevator. Outside, the city was quiet again, and for the first time in weeks, so was I. They called it an emergency session, but by the time I walked into the boardroom, it looked more like a war room. The walls of glass reflected nothing but faces drained of color. Half the screens were black. The rest displayed frozen dashboards of halted projects, each one stamped suspended pending federal clearance. The CEO stood near the head of the table, his tie loosened, voice hoarse from a day of shouting. Papers covered the floor, contracts and blueprints scattered like wreckage. Ethan sat 2 seats away, motionless, his gaze fixed on the blank screen in front of him. The tension in the air had texture sharp, metallic, almost audible. "Grant," the CEO began, his tone cracking under the weight of desperation. "I know things were said that shouldn't have been said, but you have to help us now. You're still the registered engineer. One signature from you and this entire nightmare ends." I didn't answer immediately. I took a seat at the opposite end of the table, the chair scraping against the tile. The sound cut through the room like a knife. I could feel every eye turn toward me, waiting, hoping for something I had no intention of giving easily. He stepped closer. "You can end this right now. We just need you to sign off the compliance forms. You'll be compensated, of course generously. The board will reinstate your pension, your benefits, whatever you want." I looked up at him calmly, meeting his frantic gaze with silence when I finally spoke. My voice came out low, steady, and sharp enough to slice through the noise. "I'll sign," I said. "When the person in charge finally understands the weight of steel." The words settled in the air, deliberate and final. The CEO blinked, uncomprehending, then opened his mouth to argue. But before he could speak, a new voice cut in from the large display at the far end of the room. It was one of the foreign investors, joining remotely from Tokyo. His expression was unreadable, but his words were not. "We didn't invest in your family," he said flatly. "We invested in Mercer." The room froze. The translation echoed through the speakers a second later, dull and merciless. The CEO's shoulders dropped as if someone had taken the air out of him. He stumbled back, catching the edge of the table for balance. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the soft hum of the projector, its light flickering across faces that finally understood what power looked like when it stopped pretending to be polite. The CEO's hand fell away from the table, and he sank into his chair, defeated, his reflection fractured across the glass walls behind him for the first time in decades. The boardroom was silent, not out of respect, but out of realization. And in that silence, I didn't gloat. I simply watched the empire collapse under the weight of its own design. The board voted at dawn. It was over in less than 6 minutes, faster than anyone expected. There were no speeches, no protests, just the quiet slide of papers being signed and the sound of a chair scraping back as the CEO was escorted out of the room. For 29 years, his voice had filled every corner of this company. Now, there was only silence. Ethan didn't show up for the meeting. Word spread that he had submitted his resignation overnight, forwarding a short message to the board. This isn't the future I wanted. I believed him, in a way. He was more victim than villain, just a man trying to carry a legacy he didn't build, in a world he didn't understand. I stayed behind after the board adjourned. The city was still waking, sunlight crawling over the skyline, catching on the cranes that had stood motionless for days. For the first time in weeks, I could hear wind through the steel beams instead of drills and alarms. The quiet felt different now, lighter, balanced, free of weight. The interim director came in carrying a stack of project reports. "They're asking if you'll stay on as senior advisor," she said carefully. I shook my head. "The foundation's steady now. It doesn't need me to hold it up anymore." She nodded and left the papers on the table. I spent the next few hours signing off the remaining compliance forms, transferring project authority to the young engineers who had earned it. Most of them had worked under me for years, learning the language of structure and patience. Watching them take over felt right. In the early afternoon, I signed the final document, the Federal Reinstatement of Operational Clearance. The line at the bottom read, "Approved by G. Mercer." For a long moment, I stared at that signature. It didn't feel like ownership or pride. It felt like release. The system had spoken. Justice had turned its wheel. And now the machine could run without me. Outside. I walked to the window overlooking the main construction site. One by one, the lights across the yard began to flicker back to life. First one crane, then another. The hum of power returned, slow and steady, like a heartbeat rediscovered. Engineers in orange vests began to move again, pointing, calling out to one another, laughter cutting through the noise. Life was returning to the structure order rebuilt from chaos. I placed my hard hat on the ledge, tracing the scratches across its surface. 29 years of work, mistakes, triumphs, all condensed into that worn plastic shell. Then I turned and walked out, leaving it behind, outside. The sun hit the steel framework, and the beams gleamed like something brand new. The city exhaled, and so did I. The office felt lighter that morning, emptied of noise, but not of memory. Boxes lined the corridor, labels handwritten, corners of old blueprints sticking out like bookmarks from another life. My resignation had been processed, my responsibilities transferred, my name slowly removed from the company's systems, for the first time in decades. I had nowhere to be, and that felt strangely right. I sat at the same desk where months ago I'd been dismissed. The bitterness was gone, replaced by something quieter, almost tender. I pulled out the old fountain pen that had followed me through every project since my first bridge. Its nib was worn smooth from years of pressure, but it still wrote perfectly straight. The letter I wrote wasn't for the board or the bureau, it was for Ethan, the boy who once thought leadership was ownership, who now carried more guilt than ambition. "Don't build for applause," I wrote. "Build so it stands when everyone is gone." When I finished, I folded the page neatly and left it on the desk. Then I picked up the rolled blueprint beside me, the new bridge design waiting for final review, and walked out into the sun. The river air carried the scent of rust and salt. My old bridge stretched across the horizon, its surface gleaming under fresh light. I stepped onto the deck, the steel warm beneath my hand, the wind snapping the edges of the blueprint like a heartbeat. Down below, workers in orange vests shouted over the hum of machines, restarting what had been frozen for weeks, near the central tower. I spotted a figure in a white helmet, directing the team with quiet confidence. When he turned, I recognized him, Lucas Tran, my former apprentice, the same man who once stayed late studying the stress tolerances of rivets, now wearing the title Chief Structural Engineer. I smiled. The circle had closed. The legacy was safe. I stayed there a while, the wind carrying the sound of hammers and laughter, the river glinting like glass beneath me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel responsible for the structure, I simply admired it. In the end, I realized the bridge was never just steel and concrete, it was every lesson I left behind. For years, I thought strength meant control, precision, perfection. But standing there, watching the next generation carry what I started, I understood something simpler. True strength is the moment you can let go and trust what you've built. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what they did. It's about freeing yourself from it. When the noise fades, when the lights go out, all that matters is whether the foundation still stands and whether you built it with enough integrity to hold long after your name disappears. If you've ever built something, a dream, a career, a family, and watched it be taken from you, I hope this story reminds you your work still matters. The world still remembers. Tell me, where are you listening from right now? If this story spoke to you, leave a comment, share it, and subscribe, not for me, but for every hand that ever built something that lasted. Because sometimes, that's how courage is passed on, one story at a time.